Hello and welcome to Two Bears Podcast. This is volume two of our three-volume series talking about mushrooms and hot peppers. Please tune in and enjoy.
We were originally talking about mushrooms, though.
Yes, we were.
So I want to know your favorite mushrooms to work with.
My favorite mushrooms to work with, one of my all-time favorite is a black trumpet, and it's one of
We're
those
gonna have
things.
We have to put pictures up on the screen for
Right, and so some people get black trumpets confused with like Whittier or something else.
I was gonna say, when you say black trumpet, I kind of thought of like Whittier or even like black fungus, like in Chinese soup, which is not a great mushroom. Cool texture, but black trumpet mushrooms.
And one of the things I like to do with it is I like to use it dried. And
They're gorgeous.
as a dried mushroom.
Are they a chanterelle? Is it a chanterelle species?
No, it's not. It's when they're a lot more flexible. They're not as rigid. They don't have a really center stem to them.
Okay.
And they're really deep. Like I'd put it, similar. It's not going to taste the same, but the same flavor profile as your sep, your porcini, and it's what I like about it is when you take it dried, you can knock it down in like a spice grinder and turn it into a dust.
Yeah.
And use that dust on things. And so like one of my favorite dishes is like a black trumpet dusted diver scallop with blood orange.
Yeah.
And so you get that umami, you get that deep flavor, you get that sweetness from the scallop, and then you have that, the acidity and flavor of the blood orange. So all those things kind of working together.
Mushrooms love acid.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mushrooms love acid. That's something Gagan said to me, was mushrooms love acid. A lot of people, they put mushrooms with cream or with other like really rich things, butter, which is totally fine. I'm not knocking it. I'm not a fan of the cream in mushrooms, but mushrooms and butter are great. Mushrooms can take a tremendous amount of acid, and they need it and they love it.
And I think what it is they're so overwhelming on the tongue that an acid actually lets you taste more of it.
Yep. Cuts right through it. So you love black trumpets. You like powdering them. You like using that powder.
Yes.
What else? Second favorite mushroom.
Maitake. I like
Maitake.
my hen of the woods.
Yeah.
Those are a big go-to for me. Piopini. I don't know if you've ever had a piopini mushroom. Piopini mushrooms are.
I'm hard on the Google today, bro.
But piopini, you eat them for their stems. Everything else you kind of eat for the cap.
I see.
The piopinis, they have the texture of asparagus.
Cool.
And so when you do those up, especially in like a pasta, it kind of camouflages in with the bucatini, and
that's very cool. That goes back to the fact that mushrooms are these colonies of billions of organisms living together, and the organisms inside each species of mushrooms are completely different, to the point where some mushrooms give you a sponge, some mushrooms have a stem, some mushrooms have a texture like asparagus, which is cellulose. That's like hard cellulose. Cellulose is like a little organic Lego. They stack up right away, and that's where you get that crunch from. That's so cool.
And then, have you ever eaten puffballs?
Back to the Google.
So it's called a jade puffball, or a puffball, and we grow them. You find them wild up north, and it's one of those things where you take them and slice them into like patties and fry them up. And
they're so cool.
And the thing with those, you have to cut them in half. And when you cut them in half, you're looking for the center, because they start to the whole center mass of that puffball will eventually turn into spores.
Okay.
And you don't want to eat the spores, so you have to cut them in half. And if it's discolored at all, you really should be using that part of the mushroom, because it
says it should be pure snow white inside. There should be no green or yellow coloring.
Exactly.
It's a crazy picture. I don't know if you can see it, but
and those things get huge. Like
It's a crazy
those
picture.
things can get like basketball sized.
I'm gonna say that's a 210 or 240 millimeter blade, and the mushroom is about 10 times the size of it. That's crazy. Oh, how do you feel about when I was at World 50 Best this year, one of the dishes we did had a Matsutake dashi. So
Right.
we got a big bag of dried Matsutake. Matsutake, for those of you who don't know, is a Japanese mushroom that is the most expensive. I I think it's the most expensive mushroom. It's like truffle prices of mushrooms.
Right.
Um, because we got them dry and the flavor is amazing, but to me, like a porcini is better. It's a little more delicate than a porcini, so I
Right.
understand it's not as overwhelming. But how do you feel about the $1 million matsutakes?
Well, it's one of those things where as an ingredient, you have to give it all the respect that it's due. But can you achieve the same flavor profile and make it more available to other people?
So I mean, what I do with stuff like that is I'll do a dish where I have like a grilled matsutake, like a brined grilled matsutake, but it's getting a porcini glaze.
Right.
Like it's getting a high acid porcini glaze. I might even braise it in porcini stock,
Right.
and do things again just over and over with the porcinis, just really racking in that super earthy mommy. Speaking of earthy, when I was young, um, uh, I used to in the middle of the night make like a whole side of salmon, and my mom would, and I just cover it with like honey and mustard, and then my mom would always have these Costco large like containers of
Right.
wild mushrooms, and she said she didn't like them because they tasted like dirt, like super earthy,
Right.
and I love that. I love that, like straight dirt, like
Right.
the earthiest flavor possible. And for me, like I would like to bring that back. I haven't seen that in a long time. I've been in fine dining, so nobody wants to serve the dirt mushrooms, but
Right. So, and I have to say, I do like button mushrooms. I do like the button mushroom just because it's if it's cooked properly, it has flavor. And like the
oh,
one
creminis and buttons, the little white ones you get at every supermarket, dude,
yep.
they could be some of the best mushrooms.
And so there's like beef bourguignon, like it's one of its key components is a champagne mushroom, which we would call a button mushroom. That's the
Okay.
same or
Yeah.
champignon
Yeah,
is the
champignon.
is the French. Uh so the but that that mushroom in the dish you need to caramelize. And so whenever I'm making beef bourguignon, I have my rondo, I have my fat in the pan, and I have all my cleaned, beautiful mushrooms quartered, and they're all sitting on one side, and they all cook. And everyone knows not to shake the pan. Like you do not shake the pan, and it
Yeah.
just cooks and it cooks and it cooks, and you get that fun, and it cooks and it cooks and it cooks, and
Because
then
so just to explain for people who don't understand why, if you shake the pan, instead of it building up the caramelization on the bottom, you're going to end up steaming all the mushrooms because they're just going to leak out water as they move around, and they're all going to sit in that water, and that water is going to steam, and you're going to get very bland,
right.
very bland buttons.
And so everyone has the rule, take basically take it off the heat, uh let it cool just for about a minute or two, and then flip each one of the little mushrooms, and then it goes back on the heat to cook. And there's a one time we were working in one of the restaurants, we would have uh kids with autism would come in and help us do basic kitchen prep and different things like that in the kitchen. And we would have this one kid would come in, and he loved to cook. He just loved to cook, and he hated peeling potatoes. He hated doing all of those things, but he just loved to cook. And so we tell him peel the 20 pounds of potatoes, and then come up we'll come up with a special for this evening. And it's kind of like a motivating thing. And he would come up with a couple dishes, and we'd put them on the menu and sell them. And and so a little bit more about this kid, his love for cooking. Uh, he would come into the kitchen. He'd be like, "Yeah, last weekend I cooked with Emerald. Oh yeah, last weekend I went and I visited Wolfgang Puck. Yeah, and he's like, he would say all of these things, and you're just kind of like, okay, yeah."
They're cookbooks.
And so one day he brings in his photo journal, and it's he's cooking. He's literally cooking with all of these chefs. He's cooking with Wolfgang Puck, and he's cooking, and we're just like, Austin, what is this? And he's come to find out his father was pretty wealthy, and he would pay these chefs to like work with his son, and he would go in and kind of spend the day with them. And
all right, if you're gonna be a nepo baby, that's the way to do it.
So
I can't be mad at a kid for blowing his dad's fortune on private instructionals with the legends.
But so one day, we're sitting there and I'm making the beef bourguignon, and Austin was working the line, and he's of the if you see a pan, shake it.
Yeah. Oh no, he shook the shrooms.
And so, and everyone, I got it. I'm sitting there, no one shake the pan, and I see Austin, and he's kind of like eyeing up my pan, and so I went and I got peanut butter, and I stuck a big thing of peanut butter on my handle so that no one would grab it. And so it's sitting there, and my mushrooms are cooking, and he walks by, and he's kind of like looking at the pan, and I'm just like, Austin, don't shake the pan. Don't shake the pan, Austin.
And did you say it? Did you verbally? You said
yeah,
it. Okay.
And so I kind of like walk away. Next thing you know, he comes walking back by the line. And he like sees the pan. He hears the pan. He just kind of like slows down, and everyone's just kind of watching him. And he looks at me and he keeps on walking. And like a minute later, he comes walking back down the line. And just like you can just see. So
he wants it so badly.
Finally, it's just like he had to give in, and so he just grabs that thing, peanut butter and all, just shakes the living bejesus out of it. And I'm like, Austin. He goes, chef, why did you put peanut butter on the handle? I was like, so you wouldn't shake it. So, but at that point, they were ready to be flipped anyhow.
They were ready. Okay, cool. Oh man, that's great. That's great. I want to tell a story about another dude named Austin. I'm trying to debate if it's appropriate or not. I think I'm just gonna do it. And I don't know his last name. It doesn't matter. I won't give out any details. So I'm with one of my good friends, and we're at a farm, and he has one of his line cooks comes down to start helping out and tending to things. And at the end of the day, we got to pack it up and go. And I asked him, I was like, yo, how far do you have to drive? Because the farm's like in Homestead. It's really far from everything. And he was like, oh, no, I'm good. And I'm like, what do you mean? What do you mean you're good? And he goes, oh, yeah, I live in my car. And I look at my friend who's his employer, and I was like, do you know this? And he just looks at me and he's like, I did not know. And this dude, Austin, shows us his car. And he's got like a bed and like a toolkit and like all this shit built into the back of it.
Right.
And I'm like, how long have you been doing this? And he's like, oh, well, I drove from like Portland to Miami, and I've been living in my car for a while. I used to be really addicted to heroin and crack, and he just goes through this whole life story. And I'm just like, and finally, whatever, we leave, and I call my boy and I'm like, bro, did you know any of this? And he's like, nope. Not a thing. So he's one of the nicest guys in the world, right. Like I'm not knocking it, but it was like, I think we all take a lot for granted.
Yeah.
Is what I got out of it. And is like you can meet someone and not really know anything about them.
Yep.
Absolutely. I spent 6 hours with this dude, and he's super cool, and I had no idea that he was in like a much less fortunate situation than I was.
Right.
And yeah, that's the whole story. It was just
Yep.
it was just wild, like wild. Anyways, yeah. So back to we were talking about mushrooms. You got the maitakes. Um, what else about mushrooms can we talk about?
So I know I mentioned wood ear mushrooms, and which is the the crunchy mushroom you find in your.
The slimy, crunchy.
It's slimy if it's old.
Yeah.
If it's not old, it's not
Well,
slimy.
all mushrooms are slimy when they're old. For those of you who don't know, when to know mushroom is bad, if it's slimy, you should get rid of it. They'll start to smell like fish, if they go bad, which leads me into one of my favorite conversations, which is also relatively super inappropriate, but we're just gonna do it in a very scientific way. So, when you're talking about organic chemistry, you get into a group of compounds called aromatic compounds. Um, Aromatic compounds feature a structure called the benzene ring, which is a molecular structure. I believe it's a hectagon or an octagon structure. And fun fact about benzene rings, when you have, I believe, 4 or 5 benzene rings fused together, that creates a carcinogen, something that will cause cancer. So when they're by themselves, it's not as much for alarm, but multiple benzene rings fused together is normally carcinogenic. All aromatic compounds, as far as I know, contain benzene rings. One of them is a group called amines, Amines. Amines have this very distinct rotting fish smell, right? And amines are present in rotting fish. That's where that smell comes from. There's also amines in mushrooms when they start to break down, and that's what causes that smell. Another thing that has that smell is pimples. Sometimes when you pop a pimple and there's that weird smell that's like almost like fish saucy, that's an amine. There's also another thing that can pick up that smell. And again, it's all coming from this very unique aromatic chemical group called amines. So there's your fun or organic chemistry lesson for the day. I think we did that appropriately.
That's awesome.
Yeah. It's weird. It's weird, but it's cool. So what do you do with your wood ears? Because besides like sweet and sour soups or like soups, I've never really had one that
So
um
so I like to get my wood ear dried, and this is something I did years ago.
that sounds
I
pretty naughty.
I would I would I would reconstitute with like rose water or orange blossom water, because wood ears by themselves have like no
No
real
flavor.
like flavor. So whatever you rehydrate them in, it'll just suck that up. So
That's
so
really cool.
so I would actually make salads and different cold preparations, but I would use the reconstituted wood ear mushroom and just really fine chiffonade, into whatever I was doing, and you would get that rose scent, you'd get the orange blossom scent, you'd do it in like cinnamon water. I mean, you could really
We gotta cook, bro.
push and pull
We gotta
those.
cook. All this food talk, man. I want to cook.
Yes. It's if I don't cook, I get depressed. Like I get like like depressed. And
There was a time not too long ago where I was, I've been doing a lot of banquet stuff. So I'm cooking 400 portions of fine dining, like high
right,
level food, but in large quantities. And they're not my menus. I'm doing it with someone else.
right,
And I almost got to a point where I was like, I'm sick of cooking.
right,
And then in the past couple months, I've done some really cool pop-ups, and it just reminded me that like without cooking, like I'm a shell,
right,
And I have a lot of other passions. There's a lot of other things that I do. I play guitar, I scuba dive, I do jujitsu, mixed martial arts. I draw, I paint, I sculpt. I do a lot. I do a lot
right,
of passionate stuff, but without cooking, man. The other day, I was just making dinner for my wife. So what I did was I took a shitload of garlic, some really high quality tomato paste, ginger, a little bit of soy sauce, tiny bit of sesame oil, a little bit of olive oil, some salt, blended that, marinated the bottoms of chickens in that and then roasted them so they got crispy on top. And while I'm doing this, I'm just thinking to myself, I love cooking. I love cooking. And then we were watching a show. It might have been my show. It might have been the competition show that I'm on.
Right.
Because I do watch myself a lot. And I was just like, I love cooking. Like I see stuff going into a hot pan and I'm just like, oh, I love it. The colors, the smells, the heat of the fire.
I was talking to one of my friends the other day, and she asked me the difference between what did she call it? Basically, the chemists who come up with different types of smells and flavors. Like the flavor, what's the difference between a flavorist?
Those are food chemists,
right?
So, like when I was at Gaghan, the head chef Rido, who's the head chef of Gaghan, he's a molecular gastronomy genius. He applied for the R&D chef job for making Beyond Meat.
Right.
So Beyond Meat was in development for like 10 years. They paid the head chef $200K a year to develop it. And they rejected him. And he's like one of the best chefs alive. And I think the reason they rejected him was because they were looking for something called a food chemist.
Right.
And they are not, I'm not going to say they're not chefs, but they're not chefs the way that we think about what a chef is, you know?
Well, she was asking me the difference between a flavorist versus a chef. And I said, basically what it comes down to is as a chef, I can produce a full sensual dish, a full sensual experience encompassing, all the aspects of sight, sound, texture, the whole thing, where they are specifically working within a range. And
well, they're very seldomly trying to create something proprietary. They're normally trying to mimic a natural flavor, whereas we're taking natural flavors, highlighting them and pairing them with each other.
Right.
So it's not the same in any way, shape, or form, but it's a really cool field of the food world.
When I said where it differs, and I'm jealous, would be the fact that memory and smell are really closely linked in the brain.
Smell is the most closely linked sense we have to memory.
Right. And so they get to play with creating that experience and imprinting, on a person, where I'm dealing with a person who's eaten a tomato, 300 times a year for the last.
And you're trying to make the best
years.
Tomato, and you're just trying to make the best tomato.
Right. And so it's like that's where they definitely have one up.
I would love to spend a month or two in a food lab learning what they do and understanding it. Because to me, I mean, my background is in biochemistry, so that's so cool to me. Because you're talking about a laboratory with a bunch of clear liquids and gases that are able to replicate any flavor or smell in the world.
And when I was a private chef, I tried to talk my employer into getting me a rotovap, so I could do stuff. And he's like, "Well, how much is a rotovap?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it's like 50 grand." Like, so he goes, how about a new oven?
Can you do without it?
But I tried. I tried.
Yeah. On my wish list of things, it's definitely a centrifuge, to be able to spin and separate and isolate, and a distillation setup. Super expensive.
Yep.
That also goes into molecular gastronomy, and that's a whole nother topic of, I started my career in molecular gastronomy and being really fascinated with it. And I've since really moved out from, I find it to be very gimmicky and just not real. And I'm into what Alex Guarnaschelli calls just good cooking.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not tricks and smoke and mirrors and bells and whistles and maltodextrin everywhere. It's just good cooking and understanding and loving the ingredients. And But it is interesting. We definitely have to do a whole expose on molecular gastronomy. And so, well, what a lot of people don't know about molecular gastronomy is that all the chemicals that are used in molecular gastronomy are used in industrial food processing and have been xanthan, maltodextrin,
Right.
all the things that they use to make the cool molecular stuff you get in a restaurant that costs $1,000 a person. Uh, it's also in your Doritos
Right.
and and like every food product that you have. It all has the stabilizers, the soy lecithin, and as I'm naming them off, like grab a product, spin it around. You're gonna find xanthan, soy lecithin, maltodextrin, um, agar, maybe kappa iota, maybe a form of kappa in it, like,
Right.
and it's just interesting that for so long they were used for like making food product. And then El Bulli came out and was like, yeah, we can spherify an olive. Not knocking the spherified olives, they're great, but good times. Do you have any other mushroom stories or comments that I want to tell? I want to tell Austin's mushroom story. So we don't talk about this a lot on here because it's not the focus, but I was on a TV show called Chow House, and one of my competitors, his name was Austin Cobb, and he lived in Italy, working in Michelin. He ran the Strand, I believe, in New York and San Francisco. Really, just high level chef all around, and he got really burnt out from running big restaurants. And he went with his friend to run the Garmager, or the salad station, at like a little hotel in Alaska during the summer one year. And he told me that on all their days off, they would go out foraging, and they would forage wild porcinis, like massive wild porcinis. And then they would hit these blueberry fields. And in the blueberry fields, there were game birds, pheasants, partridge, whatever, pigeon. And they would use slingshots to hunt the game birds. And when they would break down the birds' meat was purple because they had been gorging themselves on blueberries, and it tasted like blueberries too. And so they would set up campfires, and they would just, saute and grill game birds, blueberries, and porcinis. And to me, it's like the most romantic thing I've ever heard in my life.
Oh yeah.
Like,
That would be absolutely incredible.
right? I would love to do that. Alaska is one of the great last wildernesses,
Yep. In Spain, they would get their partridges. They were wild, and so they would put a ton of barley out. The partridge would come, and then they would net the partridge, or they would shoot them. One of my first couple days in Spain was picking shot out of partridge, for the table.
So I've never gotten to do that. Does it, like, what would you say the percentage of animals that are like destroyed by the shot is?
I'd say it's pretty low because they use birdshot and they're standing pretty far back.
So a couple pellets hit them.
Yep. And so, but the awesome thing is they would have the barley in their gullet, and the acid from the gullet would make the barley really, really almost sweet. And so basically you would cook the barley and the partridge.
I live for that. I live for that. Oh my God, that's so cool. All right, so what else we got besides mushrooms?
Well, I do have a story about mushrooms.
Yes.
I can't say.
Is it the one you were starting in the beginning?
No.
Okay.
But this
do tell.
But when I was in Vermont, and this was like really right before I went to culinary school. Okay. And in the restaurant that we were in, or that I was in, they were having they had a new owner come in. They had we like broke down the restaurant, knocked out walls, increased seating, changed the kitchen around, and when this happened, the executive chef had left, and I was kind of like filling in the role, and I was helping, put the kitchen together, helping out with the design and all that kind of stuff. And then when it came before we were to open, uh, they bring in this other chef. So I'm not the executive chef. They bring in this other, and Daria, who was the general manager, and I have Daria stories that are amazing. I love Daria. She's like the one of the best general managers I ever had the pleasure of working with. She sits me down and she goes, "We knew if we give you the executive chef job, you wouldn't go to school, and you know, uh, in Vermont, there's not a lot of really high end restaurants or anything like that. So once you hit a certain level, you just kind of bounce across like different restaurants until somebody dies, and then you go into the executive chef position. So
that's dark.
it is. So she's like, we the reason why we didn't promote you into executive chef is we want you to go to school, and
culinary school.
Right. And so I was
that's our next topic of conversation.
All right. And she's like, which I think, looking back on it, it was awesome for her to do that, even though I was like upset. So they bring this chef in, and the chef and I would just go round and round and round over, like, he knew how to do everything. He did not need anybody's help. He knew how to do everything. And I'm just like, are you sure you want to do that? Because I'm pretty sure it's going to burn, caramelizing your bones at 600 degrees in a pizza oven. It's
that's not caramelizing, that is carbonizing.
And so it was literally the last day I was there, and I was like, the mushroom forager comes in the back door, and I'm like, yeah, I'm heading down to the CIA, and so this is kind of like goodbye.
You're a CIA.
I am. It's so
bougie.
And so he's like, I don't have much, I have a couple things of this, I have a couple things of that. I got some chanterelles, but I have like 15, 20 pounds of slippery jacks. And I'm like, I'll take it all. I'll take everything that you have. And he's like, you want the slippery jacks? I'm like, yeah, I'll take the slippery jacks.
I'm Googling slippery jacks. Hopefully it doesn't give me porn. I'm going to put mushrooms, slippery jack mushrooms.
So that all goes that all so that it goes into the cooler, all that kind of stuff, and because the mushroom guy, he would always come in at like 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock at night, so menu's already set, and so we bring the mushrooms in. I put them all in the cooler, and I'm like, chef, I brought in slippery jacks. Have you ever worked with slippery jacks before? And he's like, oh yeah, I know slippery jacks. I know what they are. I'm like, chef, this is a kind of like a unique,
there's a reason why they're called slippery.
Exactly.
Which is what I'm finding out right now on the internet.
And so I'm sitting there and I'm like, I gave him every opportunity to say that he didn't know what he was doing. And so the next day I was no longer there, and they ended up with all these slippery jacks. And a few days later I call the restaurant and I'm just like, did the chef ever use those slippery jacks? And they're like, yeah, he used them. I'm like, have you been getting any calls from any customers? And they're like, why, yes, we are. Because
he didn't wipe off the slime and everyone got diarrhea.
Exactly. That's exactly what happened.
And I just figured that out on the internet right now.
You have to understand, back then, I don't think Google was much of a thing, if it was a thing.
Yeah. No, it wasn't.
So, but it was like, I asked him, like, do you know what you're doing? Do you know what you're doing? He's like, yes, I know what you're doing.
Well, I think it's all too common in the chef world for people to have just magnificent egos, like, I mean, everyone says I have an ego too, which for sure I do, but not a big enough ego to take a product that I've never worked with and be like, yeah.
Well, I think all chefs have an ego to some degree. I think you have to in order to survive.
Yeah, of course.
Just because
it's a competitive world.
It is, and you walk into a kitchen. It's your first day out of culinary school, and you walk on that line, and everything.
Yeah, everything. Everything.
And you get your head handed to you, but
Yeah. By everyone, by everyone, constantly. So let's talk about culinary school. So you said you're a graduate of CIA.
I am.
I myself am a graduate of Le Cordon Bleu, but I did Dusit Thani. So I did Le Cordon Bleu in Bangkok, and I actually studied Thai cuisine. So
All
they
right.
had a 16-month program of Thai cuisine, and I want to hear about your experience in culinary school, the good, the bad, what you liked, what you didn't. If you think that culinary school is for everybody, if you think that it's for nobody, if you think that it's for some people, and I open the floor to you, Dom.
All right. So culinary school is, I think, can be very important. For me, what happened was I knew that there was huge chunks in my culinary repertoire that I didn't know how to fill. So
Can you
it's
give an example with that?
well, it's so I went from your basic grill cook to sous chef in months. You know what I mean? Like I just like blew through the ranks, and and so in doing that, I knew there was a vacuum. There was stuff that I just did not know. I didn't have experience with. I didn't know how to do, and I knew that
Well,
culinary.
as a sous chef, you're expected to really understand hundreds, if not thousands, of ingredients.
Right. And I knew that I wasn't there. It's because I literally went from, I mean, I did baking and pastry, like I did all that kind of stuff. But as far as working the line and doing all of that, I knew how to push the buttons to get the Cisco stuff delivered. I knew how to, make all of the Greek food that you could possibly, imagine. But, it didn't know anything about mother sauces, didn't know anything about, any of that
Escoffier.
stuff. Exactly. And
Oh,
so
we're supposed to talk about the Escoffier cookbook and the other lady's cookbook too.
that's right. So it was culinary school, I think, was a necessity for me in order to grow. And one thing that I tell people is that, culinary school uh, is is just as much about the contacts you make as it is about the dishes that you learn. And I know that the CIA, was
Oh, the most connected.
yeah, very connected. But the
That's
thing
like
is,
Thomas Keller's fucking baby, bro.
so well back then it was Paul Bocuse. Like Paul
Ah,
Bocuse, he,
Bocuse.
he was he himself said it was the best culinary school in the world, which upset a whole bunch of the French. Uh, but I'm the type of
What
person.
doesn't upset a whole bunch of French?
uh, I'm of the persuasion of if someone says that their child wants to go to culinary school, I want to meet the kid and then I want to recommend the culinary school. I don't always say you need to go to the CIA. You need to
Well,
go.
CIA is like 50K a year or something, right?
Not anymore. It's way more than that.
It's more.
Yeah, it's
CIA is like going to medical school, man. Like,
it is, and you can get your bachelor's. I think you get your master's there now too.
yeah,
When I was there, they were just starting the bachelor's program, but not all culinary school isn't for everybody. And so I told my oldest daughter, I was like, in the kitchens, why don't we just get you plugged in with kitchens? You can go in and stage, you can go in, you can work, you can, work your way up through. Then if you feel you need to go to culinary school, we'll talk about it.
that's
Because
definitely that's the recommended route.
I
Nobody should go to culinary school without having worked in a restaurant.
yeah, absolutely. And
You know,
when I went to culinary school, you had to have so many hours before you were allowed to go. But then once the Food Network came out, they kind of swept that underneath the rug, and they were just taking the checks. So it's but the
actually, I think Le Cordon Bleu got shut down in America for that.
it was I was trying to get my bachelor's degree through Cordon Bleu with my credits from my CIA associates, and the it was definitely I understand why it was shut down.
Yeah.
I had to do an event for some political figures, and it was a basically a sequestered kitchen. So when I was going in, I was bringing my staff with me, and everyone who goes in and does this has to basically, you give up your phone, there's zero communication with the outside world, because they're talking peace politics in the Middle East. And
Yeah.
so everyone's basically locked in. I do this event, and afterwards I'm talking to the school, and I'm like, yes, I missed these classes, but I missed these classes because, and I'm trying to explain to them, it's like, I'm
Oh, and they were like, you can pay to reserve the kitchen to redo the practical, and you can sit in the room and watch the video of the lecture class. And even if you do an amazing job, you still get a zero for the day.
exactly.
Is that's the policy?
I mean,
Oh, I went nuts at Le Cordon Bleu, bro. I was late my first day because I was in Bangkok and I got lost trying to drive there myself,
right.
and they didn't want to let me in class, and I flipped out at the headmaster. Yeah,
So had a couple issues. Uh but
but
yeah, so
overall,
overall, for me, the culinary school experience was valuable, and the contacts that I was able to make in school was amazing. And to this day, I could call any of those chefs, and if I have any issues or I'm doing anything that I need help with or anything like that, they're on the phone. So,
yeah,
but but I tell people, if you're going to go to the school, no matter what school you go to, you want to work with the chefs outside of class, and because that's how they get to see you work. And that's how, I think when I was at school, we had three chefs uh that were former White House chefs.
yeah,
And so if you want to do anything like that, like work for the White House or anything like that, uh they don't take apprentices, they don't take students, because it costs 15 grand for them to run the security check just to
yeah.
get you through the door. But one of these guys calls and says, "Hey,
You're in. Yeah,
you're in." So it's who you know. Uh and so that's why I say, I was looking at a couple different ones.
it's
Uh
very interesting that you say that because when I went to culinary school, um, so I studied Thai cuisine, and the recipe book they gave us is invaluable.
right,
The recipes that they gave us were like old Thai recipes. They're not on the internet. There's no way to get those recipes. I have two copies of it and a digital copy,
right,
and I still reference it all the time because it's like real, authentic Thai recipes. Now, at the same time, the format of sitting in lecture and then doing the practical, I had worked in restaurants for a long time before I went to culinary school, and it drove me crazy because I thought they were teaching you how to cook at home, and like nothing was prepared. Like you're starting and finishing a dish in a 4 hour period. It's not like in a restaurant how you do the prep and it's set for pickup, and then when you get the fire ticket you fire it, or you have it on standby and then you
right,
fire it. And I found that to be a little frustrating. At the same time, while I was in culinary school, I was interning and then working at a Michelin restaurant at the same time. So I also had a horrible attitude because I'd come into class and I'd be like, why do I have to be here? Like, I have service tonight,
right.
Like, all in all, I don't know, man. I have very mixed opinions on it.
Well,
I have,
it's one of those
I,
things
I feel
where,
like they took a lot of money. I feel like it was not commensurate to the amount of money that was spent on it. But then again, if you go to restaurants and you stage around and whatever, you're gonna get a lot of exposure and you're gonna learn a lot, but you're only gonna learn what those restaurants are cooking.
right.
And when you go to culinary school, you are taught a very diverse range of technique, and you're taught to work with a very diverse range of ingredients. And I think that is a very valuable training to undergo.
This is Chef Don. Thank you for tuning in for this second edition of the three-part series, and we should be releasing the third part coming up here pretty soon. Stay tuned.